build on the discussion we had last month where we continue to pursue the statutory responsibility that we have in studying an alternative to the gas tax. Obviously, in this process, our big charge is to gather public input and then develop recommendations on what would be the design and evaluation of a road charge program. We have a very full agenda today that's going to cover a lot of topics related to public participation, global road charging policies, and the specific dimensions that we have for road charge in the state of California. And so anyhow, to keep our tradition going of completing committee meetings on time, throughout the discussion today, if an issue comes up that's important but it's not on the agenda or something that might require more substantial discussion than we have time for today, we'll note in what we're calling our parking lot, and we can address those at the appropriate time in the future. So with that, I will turn it to Carrie to call the roll for those that are here today.
Chair Medaffer.
Here.
Senator Jim Bell.
He's going to try to be here at some point during the day. Both the senator and the assembly member have committee meetings today, but they're going to try to be here when they can.
Assemblymember Chu. David Finnegan.
Here.
Stephen Finnegan.
And Stephen is running a little late due to mechanical problems on an aircraft.
Scott Haggerty. Gautam Hans. Lauren Kay.
Here.
Richard Marcantonio. Pam O'Connor.
Here.
Eshwar Pitimpali.
Here.
Robert Poitras. Eric Sawyer.
Present.
Lee Tien.
Here.
Martin Wax.
All right, and I believe it was Supervisor Haggerty also has some committee meetings in his district today, and was not able to be there, although he has staff following the meeting along. So we have in front of us minutes from the January 23rd meeting. If folks have had a chance to see those, there's one correction to the draft minutes under items 4B and 4D. The names of all 13 aye votes will be listed, and that's pursuant to new provisions in the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. So if I could have a motion to approve with the
I'll move that with
those
noted.
notes. Thank you very much,
O'Connor.
Pam O'Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you, Eric. There's a second to the motion. Any discussion on it? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right. That motion carries. Thank you very much. So when you look at the agenda today, there's a number of things. We'll be just introducing them along. You'll get a chance to meet the consultants that are on our team. But what we thought we would start with this morning is something that's been in the news of late, and that is pause.
Sorry, Chair. John Casey is not here yet.
He's not here. Well, it is only 10:03, and he probably didn't realize we operate in such an efficient manner. That's all right. Well, why don't I take the opportunity then to introduce our consultants, since you'll be hearing from them in a little bit. I see Jack Opiola is here. I know, Jack, you're probably going to be speaking a little bit as we get closer on, but I'll just kind of take this out of order and let everybody get a chance to see you, and perhaps before we get into the next item, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then if there's something that you have more in your presentation later on, you can save it for that. But introduce yourself and your team.
Thank you very much, Chair Medaffer. It's a pleasure to be here. It with computerized parking control systems, tolling systems, congestion charging, and road charging. We basically have worked around the world. We have a really a worldwide of experience that we've put together, and I've put a team together with D'Artagnan that was formed in 2011. London on the congestion charge, Sweden for their system, and Manchester, UK.
We took it.
Okay.
Brought it up.
No, yep, well, okay, never mind.
We're going to come back to that.
Okay, we're going to come back to that later. Anyway, it's great to be here. We are trying to bring, and I think we started this month by giving you some materials before the meeting, which will keep as a practice on giving you some briefing books, or as we refer to them as briefing books, some materials to give you background information on subjects that we'll be addressing in the meeting, so that when coming to the meeting, our discussions can leap forward into the depths of issues that you've had some pre-reading before coming to the meeting. We'll try to keep them in this deck format so that they're easy to get through. If you have any comments or other things you'd like to see in the briefing books, please let us know. We're here to assist you in whichever way we can. And we are just thrilled to have an opportunity to work with you on this very important subject.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jack. What I think we'll do, since we're still waiting for the speakers, oh, there he is. Well, man, look at that timing, John. Yeah. Thank you very much. We were very artfully stalling, but so as a way of introducing John, on February 4th of this year, which is just a mere 22 days ago, it seems like a year ago, Assembly Speaker Tony Atkins announced a proposal to increase transportation infrastructure funding to improve the safety and efficiency of California's highways, bridges, and roads. I've likened it as bridge financing, not to build new bridges, but gap financing, if you will. We need to do something now. I think clearly if you, with Will Kempton, the Executive Director of the CTC, at both the Assembly and Senate Transportation Committees this week. Even Dan Walters had a piece today calling on the governor to do more. Transportation, in my mind, is, I'm very happy to see it, is really reaching a level, transportation funding, that it truthfully deserves, considering how far in the hole it's been. And so it was very heartwarming to see Speaker Atkins make her announcement with a proposal that's legislative in nature, and it obviously is going to take an effort to get passed, but at least it's a start to try to cover some of the huge deficit that we have. And so with that, John Casey, Speaker Atkins' Chief of Staff, is here, and he's going to provide an overview on her proposal and discuss how this plan interacts with what we're doing, as I liken it as a much longer-term solution to permanent funding for transportation. So, John, thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and I'm sorry I was a little bit late. One of my new roles with the Speaker's communications director now, and so we're trying to set up some interviews regarding another one of her proposals that has to do with affordable housing. So thank you for taking the time to and indulging me. So anyway, we are planning and introducing an actual bill. It will be a spot bill at the current time to have this proposal go through the legislative process. Right now, it's it is a very early work in progress, but the basic gist of it is a road user charge. I know that's very similar to what you're calling the vehicle miles traveled road user charge, and it's not to be confused with those things. I think Jim actually described it pretty aptly in regarding a bridge. We know that the work that you guys are doing is going to be taking a couple years, and even after that, it's going to probably take a little bit longer to actually, get the data back from the program. So the Speaker thought that it was important to get the funding conversation started now. So I think it was a pretty big step that she took. As a matter of fact, when she spoke at the California Transportation Foundation, I think we got a letter back saying it was the boldest proposal that they had seen in the 10 years of the conference. So she definitely stuck her her neck out because she believed that the conversation needed to be started. All the particulars are still to be worked out, and that's why we want to do it through a policy bill and not just through the budget. So our initial thoughts are that it would be somewhere, this is kind of a messaging thing I'm learning. We said something around $1 a week, and that immediately got put in the press as $52 a year. And it may be $52, it may be $50. It's not going to be anything more than that. There are some ideas that maybe there would be a little bit more charged for all electric vehicles, as well as potentially commercial vehicles would pay a little bit more as well. But we don't see significant amounts in either one of those other two categories, much above the $50 to $52 a year. And we will, our right now, that's about what the bill does. I mean, there's a lot of talk about folks who want to see it, where they want to see the money go. And obviously, I think that'll be, you guys know this probably better than anybody, that'll be the real rub and where the money goes, to go to the STIP, to the shop, to the local streets and roads. And I just want to make it clear, and the speaker has been on record in several different forums on it. I mean, she comes from local government, and so she does believe that, local government should have a share of this as well. So, but all of those, because there have been some concerns as to how the money will be split up. We hope everybody will be at the table. The bill will be going through the policy committee, through Mr. Frazier's committee, and so we look to work closely with him and all of you to figure out exactly the best way that the money is allocated.
Well, thank you, John. And I'll see if there's folks that have questions. Probably one of the biggest issues that has come up in this process is this committee charged under statute with really addressing the possibility of a, as you called it, a vehicle miles traveled charge as a replacement to the gas tax. The issue that I hear more about than anything is one of messaging, based on what we're calling it, and frankly, we don't really have the best terms. I mean, there's even a national organization that sounds like more of a disease. It's called MABUFA. It stands for Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance, and these guys definitely got some issues when it comes to branding. And then you've got this thing, it's road charge. Some people were calling it road user charge. We got rid of the U because we didn't like ruck, because it rhymes with too many things that aren't that good. So we're calling it road charge. But then you guys come along with road charge, and we wanted to make sure, and if you could certainly, as you go through the machinations of writing the legislation, be cognizant, as we were hearing from this technical committee, which is made up of privacy experts, trucking. I mean, we're by far not transportation experts at this table. Some may be, but in reality, it's a legislation called to hear from various parts of the state on what might make sense. And we'll be going on a listening tour this year and really getting input. So just the one thought to offer to you, and then I'd like to hear from my fellow committee members if they have questions or comments, is just to be mindful of the messaging. That whether we're called a vehicle mile traveled fee, the key for us has been to replace the gas tax, because as you know, it doesn't work anymore. We learned that at the last meeting here. It's phasing out, especially with CAFE standards. 10 years from now, at 55 miles of the gallon, your revenues are doing this. But if you guys call it a road charge, then what does that do with what we're working on? So just wanted to offer that to you as perspective. And we operate, we've changed our venue. We were at a big dais at the last meeting over at Lincoln, and now we're very happy to be in a much smaller group. So I'd like to call in any of my fellow committee members if you have any questions or comments for the Speaker's office on this legislation. They're a very talkative group.
Yeah, I can see. I like that. Actually, we are cognizant of that idea, and it did come up a little bit in our discussion. So, what we call it, obviously, some people think it's a fee, some people think it's a tax, some people are calling it a car tax. And as you know, I mean, where those pots of money go, depending on whether it's a vehicle license fee versus an excise tax versus it's pretty complicated, and those are things that are hard to get across to the public as well. So, but we're open to. It's certainly not in our in the long term envisioning on this is not to vehicle miles traveled type of program. I mean, that's up to your guys' thing. So this is simply a way for us to get to where we're going to need to go, because obviously just yesterday, the BOE, or was it the day before, they dropped the 6 cents on the variable sales tax on the excise tax on gas. So we know we need to do something, and I think this is a way for the speaker to actually just, let's get this conversation started in earnest and actually, put something out there that, a good segment of the population is not necessarily all that popular. I mean, I would imagine that most of the constituent calls we've been getting have not necessarily been, glowing praise for the idea. That usually comes more from the transportation sector, I think, understands the need for it. But as we build the case, as we go further along and realize that the need is as great as it is, and the funding is going down like it is, that hopefully the public will understand that $1 a week, to get this huge backlog of infrastructure improvements that we need to have completed to get done. So,
Thank you. Professor Wax?
Oh, you already touched on what I would have asked about. Of course, I've read all of the coverage in the media, and I just wondered whether you can share with us some of the background. That is, did you meet with interest groups and do any polling or focus groups, and decide that this particular form of charge is maybe more acceptable, for example, than raising the gas tax, which is another way of increasing revenue? And this question is relevant to us because of our work also having a very big impact on the public.
no, the simple answer is we did not do any polling or focus groups on it. I know that some polling and focus groups have been done. There were some initial conversations with the Department of Finance, not specifically with the governor's office, but some of the folks in their office, to try to find some an idea that would be, probably palatable to the public, and still get enough money, significant amount of funding into the system that would actually still have some impact. And there were some initial talks with some of the transportation funding organizations as well. But I've heard from certain groups too that there has been some polling on whether or not, how you call it and what you talk, is it a, car tax doesn't poll well with folks and along those lines. So I mean, there's definitely some education I think that needs to be done, and messaging to convince the public that it's a worthwhile charge or fee or whatever we're going to call it. Yeah.
Lee Tien?
Yeah, so I got the impression, I met with the...
Oh, Lee, use the mic if you could, just
Oh,
since
sorry.
this is being webcast.
Yeah, so a group of privacy advocates, we met with Speaker Atkins a couple of weeks ago, and this was actually before I even knew that she had a road charge plan, and I mentioned that I was working on this committee, and she said, yes, this is a big issue for us. I got the impression from her that it was primarily sort of at a policy level motivated by simply by the financial need and the policy need on infrastructure. But I did raise with her that we thought that there are significant privacy issues involved in how one decides to measure miles traveled or road usage, and her comment was that that was something that was definitely going to be part of your deliberations. So I was just wondering along the way whether you've made any sort of initial kinds of choices or thoughts about which directions, how you want to proceed in this, keeping in mind that there are privacy issues with locating users.
Well, again, I mean, I think our bill is more of it's going to be placed on the vehicle itself. So it wouldn't have anything to do with vehicle miles traveled at all. It would simply be a flat fee that goes on each individual vehicle. So, I mean, I think the conversations and the work that this committee is going to be doing is actually going to come up with the answers to a lot of the questions that I think that need to be answered, obviously. My previous employer was Alan Lowenthal, who I worked for 14 years, who was the chair of the Transportation Committee in the Senate for quite a while. So this issue is one that I know we were talking about, the vehicle miles traveled, years and years ago as a form. But I'm glad to see that, Mr. DeSaulniers, Congressman DeSaulniers' bill created this committee, and it's going to allow these discussions, which are incredibly important and ones that need to be hashed out, can continue to go forward. But our bill right now is envisioned as a flat fee per vehicle, so it would not have anything to do with a per mileage, any kind of base fee.
Okay. Any other questions for
No.
Councilman?
My comment is a little bit more. Obviously, we have the kind of shared, how do we communicate to the public about what the issues are, and that's something we'll be working on too, what that messaging is. I mean, kind of the core of it is, what is it that we want? The whole purpose of it is to have a reliable, safe road system in the state of California that, whether it's cars or trucks or transit, would use. So again, how do we get that? I mean, it was interesting, as you noted, going for the $1 a week, to put it in context, but yet that can be easily, quickly put into the $52 a year, which still is reasonable. So I think that will be our ongoing challenge, and as we all are working together on this, sharing that kind of what's working on messaging, what's not, and working together to communicate to the public what the issues are as we hear from them.
I completely agree. I mean, we were doing a little bit of, there was a report that was put out, I think, by the LA, or it might have been Caltrans, that talked about, how right now the purchasing power of our excise tax is as low as it's ever been in the state's history since 1923. And, the fixed income, the fixed sales excise tax on gas is actually, its purchasing power is about 6.8 cents from when it was first put in to place in 1994. So I think once the public, hopefully once they realize that those are, if we had the same amount, I think in 1953 it was a 6 cent per gallon excise tax on gas, and that provided, if we had that same type of thing in place today, I'm not suggesting that we should, but it would, the golden age of the California roadway system would provide, I think, about $53 billion a year today. So the purchasing power of our excise tax has certainly gone down, and we need to get that out to the public as well. All of these issues are very important.
That's the biggest problem I've seen is with the public, is that they just are convinced that they're paying enough already and it's not going to where it's supposed to go. And I think once you start peeling the layers of the onion and they realize that, as you were alluding to, John, the purchasing power has just gone down and expenses have gone up. You didn't used to have stormwater issues. You didn't used to have all these environmental constraints and all of these things that now cost so much more when it comes to rehabilitating our roads. I'm not even talking about building new roads. I'm talking about just rehabilitating the ones we have. And that is where this process, this task force's work is going to be so crucial to really helping
Absolutely.
go the long term. What the Speaker's proposal is, which I personally support strongly, is a great step in the right direction as a down payment. But it's only for 5 years long. Hopefully within 5 years, the work of this task force will be turned into the form of legislation that will, in fact, go on into the future from there.
Absolutely. I mean, the work you're doing is, I think, vital to the future of the transportation funding in the state. So thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you so much, John, for being here. One more, and I was going to introduce Assemblymember David Chu, who we first of all welcome you to the task force. I was looking at, he's not able to be here the whole day today, but just looking at his binder that says Thursday, he's got a busy day. Assemblymember.
Thank you. First of all, this is probably the longest time I'll be able to sit in one place today, so thank you for that. But as a representative of the Assembly, I first want to say, for those of us that care very much about transportation funding, we were simply thrilled that the Speaker was willing to lead on this conversation, and I am fully supportive of that agenda. That being said, as has been alluded to, it is going to be a heavy lift, and I think for me and many of our colleagues, we want to use the opportunity of this proposal being out there really to highlight the need and to explain to people we've got $60 billion of infrastructure repair, and as aggressive and as courageous as this proposal is, it will address $10 billion of that $60 billion need, and we know we've got more work to do. From my perspective, I think this committee is really laying the groundwork for the long-term vision of where we go, but we've got to start the conversation in the short term really to put a marker down, and I think for us in the Assembly, we want to kickstart that conversation and use that as a way to focus the public on the potholes and the sinkholes, and then to ask, let's take a step back. We have to figure out a way to pay this. Hopefully, at least this $1 a week fee is a start, but the things we're talking about here will need to engage in the future, and if this is a pilot or a more permanent legislative solution, we will figure out, but that is my interest, and I just wanted to share that with folks, and certainly also mention for colleagues, happy to engage with you guys in this conversation. I just want to mention, because my schedule can be a little challenging, my chief of staff is here, Judson Shrew in the back, who happened to work at the San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency, is very familiar with these issues, so if there are any ways that we can work with you and be helpful, please let us know.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember.
Is that it for me?
Anything else for John Casey? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the
Please.
work you're doing.
Please tell the speaker thank you again.
I will.
And before, I'm going to turn it over to Will in a second to give a little bit more of a background on what the speaker's bill is, but before Richard Marcantonio stands up and walks away, I'm going to let him introduce himself briefly, and then we'll come back to Assemblymember Chu. Both Richard Marcantonio and Assemblymember Chu, due to scheduling issues, were not able to be at our first meeting, but I wanted to give you both the opportunity to say something.
Thank you, Jim.
You're on the air.
I'm on the air. All right. Well, thank you. I am a managing attorney at Public Advocates, a civil rights organization in San Francisco, and have done work over the last 10 or 12 years on transportation issues, and particularly how they affect low-income communities and communities of color, issues of public transit service, cuts, fare hikes, et cetera, as well as equity in how we spend the dollars. I'm very pleased to be part of this important work with this committee, because I fully agree both with the fact that the current funding is inadequate. I'm just reading some very encouraging news nationally from some other states, including Iowa, I believe, where raising their gas tax at the state level is actually a live discussion that's happening across the country. I think this is a much better approach that we're looking at, because the other pressing issue that I'm here to try to keep on the table is, and that I think a lot of others are as well, is the inequity in how low-income drivers are paying a much higher share of the burden, and perhaps getting less of the benefits as well of that spending. So thank you, and I was just going to step out to the men's room for just a moment.
You're allowed to do that.
I know that's on a national webcast now, but excuse me.
Thank you very much. And I know, Assemblymember, you did offer some comments, but again, we want to just recognize that you're here and appreciate it and understand your schedule. Thursdays are almost impossible days. And we're moving, this is our last Thursday meeting, we're moving to Fridays. And I did speak with Judson, your chief of staff, who will be monitoring these things for you. We understand that Fridays for Assembly members are days in the district. And so we're giving you a pass. There was a reason we changed the rules. So members of the committee are excused. But it is important to have your perspective, and when you are able to be here or send messages to us, we think that interactive dialogue is important. Please.
Just one more comment on that. So just by way of background, I spent the last 6 years as the president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and I represent a city where our buses are late 40% of the time. Actually, as of this week, 42% of the time. We have some of the most dangerous intersections in the state when it comes to pedestrians and seniors and cyclists, and our roads are as potholed and as challenged and as congested as any in the state. And so for the last half dozen years, I've been a transportation advocate, and very much look forward to thinking about these longer-term, hopefully technology-driven solutions that move us in a better place, and really look forward to the expertise that many of you represent and giving us feedback on this.
Thank you very much. All right, and with that, Mr. Kempton, if you want to kind of give a little background, since you've spent a little bit of time over in the Capitol this week.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. And welcome to the new members, Assembly member. What I wanted to basically give you is a little bit of background on the Speaker's proposal, so that you know what she has put on the table. And by the way, as a board member for the California Transportation Foundation, and actually as a co-chair for the event that was held in February, our annual forum, the Speaker's proposal was, in fact, one of the boldest presentations that we've ever had at at the forum. We were delighted that she chose our forum to make that announcement, because we have been speaking for years and years, as has the Commission, about the needs in transportation. It's a relatively simple proposal. Again, it'll, as John indicated, it'll be in bill form, but I think obviously they're willing and hopeful that they'll get a lot of input, and what we see at the end may not be what we see at the beginning. The good news is that the issue is out on the table, that the proposal has been made, and it's a proposal that we can sort of galvanize around in terms of the larger issue. She is proposing a road usage, I'll use the term fee, of some sort that would raise about $1.8 billion annually. And that, excuse me, that money would be in place presumably for a 5-year period, $2 billion a year in total, raising $10 billion over the time frame. The additional $200 million would come from loan paybacks. These are part of the money that has been borrowed from the transportation accounts over a variety of years. So $1.8 billion in new fee revenue, $200 million a year for $1 billion of loan paybacks, totaling the $2 billion a year, or $10 billion over the 5-year period. The unique feature of the Speaker's proposal is that she does, in fact, transfer weight fees back to direct transportation programs. That's $1 billion a year that will come back into the direct transportation program if the Speaker's proposal is successful. But she uses a significant portion of the new revenues to backfill that loss to the general fund. And I think that's very important from a standpoint of folks that have concerns about the general fund programs, and certainly the governor as he works to bring down the wall of debt, and looking at his rainy day fund. So that is a proposal feature that I think is going to be helpful if we're talking about the return of truck weight fees for transportation purposes. So again, $1 billion from the weight fees, about $1.8 billion in new fees, $200 million a year in loan payback money, and then a return of some of those fee revenues to backfill the loss of weight fees to the general fund.
Any questions?
So my question is a really stupid one, which is...
No question stupid.
Oh, they don't believe it. They can be. What I realize is because I do not do transportation policy, I have not been in this. I do not have sort of the law of, or the rules of the road of transportation funding 101. You know, when Will talks about how this is going to go into this account and this is a general fund thing, and you know, we were talking about this at the last meeting. Well, you know, you can't, if you do it this way, you can't do that. I don't know any of those things, so I was wondering if someone could prepare, you know, just like a 2-page, 3-page memo, something that sort of like lays out what buckets.
It's actually a sheet that's bigger than this screen, believe it or not.
But still, you know,
I think
otherwise, right now, I don't
very good
grasp
question.
the significance of any of those
That's
things.
a great request, and we can provide you with a summary, a couple of page summary, but also Caltrans publishes a pamphlet. It's not huge. It's about 30 pages long, as I recall.
Handle 30 pages.
It goes through, and with a lot of pictures and charts, but it goes through and explains really well how transportation is funded. So we'll give you the 2-page summary, and we'll also attach that pamphlet for your use.
Yeah, I think we should get that to him. And I think the other thing that might not be a bad idea, Will, for the next meeting, and I know we are so tight on time with such a compressed schedule, is perhaps some kind of a transportation funding 101, maybe just a 15-minute primer that could be a very easy slideshow that I think we really should. I mean, the beauty of this task force is that most of the people here are not transportation people. That was the design of the legislation, because we wanted to make sure that it's not the echo chamber creating what goes forward. So that's what all of you have so much to add. But I think the point that you raised, Lee, is outstanding.
Just remedial learning for me.
We should do that, and probably my bad for not thinking of that early on. But we'll definitely make up for that at our March meeting. Yeah. Richard?
And if I could also, I think that's a great request, and thank you for providing that. If the two-pager could also specify the kinds of, the uses for which different funding streams are eligible, capital construction, capital maintenance, operating, et cetera, transit, roads, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
And
a
maybe we
pretty
can get
sobering.
that up on our webpage for the general public.
And as I think you saw in that last meeting when Stephen Keck gave the presentation showing how funding has gone down, well, and you didn't get a chance to see it, but it becomes a very sobering event just to see why funding has become so scarce when it comes to transportation. Okay, so with that, we'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is what we've titled committee reports. And kind of this is for any members of this committee to brief the entire committee and the public on any road charge pilot program related events they've attended or any interactions you've had with the media since the last meeting. We don't anticipate this to be a big thing, but I think it's important it's almost like an open forum for the task force to get a chance to talk about things. And I'll just kick it off just to let everybody know. Earlier this week, Monday and Tuesday, Gary Gutierrez, Caltrans, who is here at the table, he and I attended a conference in Washington, D.C. That was this mileage-based user fee alliance. Professor Wax was there as well, and both Gary and I were on a panel along with Jim Whitty from Oregon, whom you remember at our last meeting, talking about it. But it was an interesting presentation. It started off with the Honorable Earl Blumenauer, who is a member of Congress from Oregon, who is an evangelist when it comes to this. It was fascinating to hear his talk. He basically was giving the speech as to how terrible transportation funding is nationwide, and very much a proponent of changing from gas tax-based financing to a mileage-driven based plan. I think obviously he has a few people in Congress to convince, but he does have legislation that's moving along. We'd had dinner the evening before with basically the chief consultant out of the Senate, who is going to be writing the next transportation reauthorization bill, and he is also very supportive of this concept of mileage charging and is going to do what he can in writing the law that ultimately will move forward. And they've got a deadline, I think, of something like May 31st, before all the money's run out, to try to incentivize states to move forward in this idea of starting to explore mileage-based charging. And then there was other issues that were there. The taxpayer groups were there talking issues pro and con about mileage charging. There was this corridor group of the I-95 corridor, and they're looking at trying to figure out a way for trucking predominantly to pay for I-95 through mileage charges as well as tolling for trucks. And then there was the discussion on the MAP 21 reauthorization and what might be happening with the new Congress. We had another member of Congress, John Delaney. He spoke on the MAP 21 reauthorization, another one that really gets it. And then we had the business community speak, which we'll be hearing more about over the months ahead as to the fascinating side of technology that's already moving forward in this area of miles traveled, and the fact that, again, nothing against government, but it seems as though the private sector will probably be able to carry the day when it comes to this. There was an issue on privacy, which very important, and so there was a number of people there speaking on privacy issues. That is by far probably the top priority that most discussions come up with when it comes to this. And then there was the panel that myself and Gary were on, and Jim Whitty, talking about what we're doing in California and the fact that Oregon's program kicks off July 1st. So it was a very good discussion, and it was amazing the amount of interest in this, and I clearly see this, and I don't know, Marty, if you want to add to it. It was pretty much at the genesis of where I think things are moving in terms of the future transportation funding.
I have nothing to add. You said it very well.
Okay, well, thank you. Any other comments from members of the task force since our meeting last on meetings they attended or issues or concerns or anything along those lines? All right, well, seeing none, then what we'll do is I'm going to introduce Carrie to kick us off into item 5 on our agenda, which will be talking about the consultant, their roles and introductions. I already had Jack introduce himself briefly, so Jack, your time's already been taken. We're sorry. No, just kidding. But Carrie, why don't you go ahead and kick off our next item?
Thank you, Chair. As I mentioned at our January meeting, the TAC will be supported by Commission staff. However, SB 1077 includes provision allowing technical assistance to be provided by the Department of Transportation, Caltrans. Caltrans has been studying the possibility of a road charge funding mechanism for some time now and have gathered a great deal of information and understanding of the complexities of the issue, and they are a natural partner in moving forward on this issue. Since the enactment of SB 1077, we, CTC staff, and Caltrans have been working together in the development of the road charge program. Gary Gutierrez is here today to provide a brief overview of Caltrans' role and responsibilities, as well as an introduction of the Caltrans team assisting the TAC. And additionally, Caltrans has entered into an agreement with a consultant to assist in the technical aspects of the road charge program and to provide assistance to the TAC. Gary.
Thank you, Carrie. Chairman Daffer, committee members. As Carrie pointed out, Caltrans' role in the interim is one of technical support to the Technical Advisory Committee. And as such, and I appreciate what Carrie said as far as us really digging into this and really gathering as much information as we could as a Department of Transportation, as an agency. One thing we've learned, and we have learned a great deal about road usage or road charge, is that the effort that California is going to be taken upon to move this forward is really a very significant effort. And therefore, we have looked around and determined how we were going to provide additional support from a technical perspective. And so we have reached out and partnered with D'Artagnan Consultants, who will also provide, they're the subject matter experts who will be able to provide knowledge from historical application of this in other states and as Jack had mentioned, over the world. As far as Caltrans, I'm actually sitting in for Norma Ortega today. She is away presenting. She is the CFO of Caltrans and also the executive lead for the Caltrans effort as far as the road charge pilot. Also, there is Brady Tactile, who serves as the project manager, and myself. I'm also serving as the project manager for Caltrans. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Jack Opila, who is the founder, managing partner, and president of D'Artagnan, who will be joining us.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you. As I introduced myself earlier, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here and partner with you all on this interesting road that we're going to be traveling down over the next several years. I spoke earlier about some of our experiences. We really bring a world of experience to this, and in that world of experience, for example, I was overseas from 1997 to about 2010, working in far-off places like New Zealand to put in their electronic road user charging, working in Germany on the MOUT system or their truck tolling system, working in London on congestion charging, in Singapore and Hong Kong on their road charging. Recently, we've been working in Oregon and Washington State. In Washington State, a group very much like this, a steering committee that was looked at overseeing and finding out if road charging was viable in Washington State. Was it feasible? And then what was the business case for it? And now they're at a point that your legislation gives you the authority to do. They're just debating now to go forward with the demonstration test. It will probably go very much in parallel with what you're doing here. And of course, we've been working in Oregon with Jim Whitty since about 2009. Revamping that program and looking at how it was approached after the earlier experience in 2005 and 6 with their pay-at-the-pump model, and then moving it forward through legislation to the point that they're now, in this year, in July, as has already been said, to put forth their first attempt with a limited number of participants on a volunteer basis, because the legislators thought that was a good way to take a small bite of the apple rather than trying to swallow the whole thing, with the intent that was expressed several cases and documented to say we can then increase that number to look at moving it forward in order to handle this interesting mix between environmental policy and transportation funding policy, because it was looked at that road charging in Oregon was a good way to marry those two together. And I think that's very true here in California, too. Let me introduce my team. My primary partners in D'Artagnan is Steve Morello. He's a senior partner. Dr. Travis Dunn, Fulbright scholar, had his training at MIT. Matthew Dorfman, who also had his policy and technical training at MIT. I think he holds more degrees than all of us put together. Along with electrical engineering, has worked in the motor industry with Bosch, understands the internals of an engine control unit. He worked on that at Bosch, and so very much is our technical expert on the staff. Jeff Doyle, who's to my right, and he's working very closely with the CTC as our interface with the CTC and assistance. So we're bringing a very diverse team and people that have, I think, a total of about 125 years experience work with transportation and transportation funding. Transportation funding is the one thing that ties us all together. We have other people. We have some other, we like to affectionately call them musketeers because we're a very flat organization. Had to drop that from the title, but we still look at each other in this very neural management approach that the lead on anything is who has the most experience or knowledge on. We don't get hung up on hierarchy. We don't get hung up on seniority. We get hung up on who knows the most on the subject to lead with it. Tim Lufer, for example. Tim's a Rhodes Scholar. He's worked with organizational design in companies prior to this at Deloitte. He's reorganized companies in organizational design and Six Sigma design in places like Macy's. So he brings a world of information in regards to how do you get the best fit of people to accomplish something. Steve Moon, who is our CPA, and Steve works on revenue reporting and accounting and auditing. He keeps track of being able to follow the money from the time it's collected to the time it gets into the fund it's supposed to get in, and making sure that it all gets there. Scott Wilson is somebody who I worked with in New Zealand at the time he was with Ministry. Scott works. He's currently doing some work in Europe. He's worked a lot with the Eurovignette systems and the European Commission on road pricing in Europe. He comes with a wealth of experience on transportation policy and funding. And then we have additional people we've augmented our team with. Shannon Crum, who has worked a great deal of time in Texas, and you'll hear her next talk about policy. PRR for program communications. PRR has also worked in Oregon on their programs. They're coming with experience of having worked with communications and the challenge of communications working with the public in Oregon. And they've worked here in California, too. They've worked on tolling projects and tolling work here in California. So they do have they have quite a bit of knowledge on the California public. But we've augmented them with DHM research because, as Marty made a comment before about outreach and getting surveys, DHM has done quite a few surveys, both in California, actually along the whole West Coast, on telephone surveys and focus groups. And then Lucas Public Affairs from here in Sacramento, working with us to make sure that we understand the California environment and messaging into the California Communications Committee and what is the basis that we should be putting forth information. So we've got a very rounded team. We have a number of subcontractors that aren't even listed there yet because we don't know yet what they're going to have to do. And that's a good part of saying that we have a challenging program ahead of us here. We've sort of looked at it as a 4-phase program, and this is very much the start of phase 1, looking to you to establish the overall road charging design and guiding principles. How should we do this? And And I know that in some of your minds, that's been stressful. But I want to say that you don't have to be perfect. We do not have to design the perfect system. In fact, if anything, with the challenge that we have in the testing, which is phase 3, and the prep for it, which is phase 2, the idea is that we have to design something where we can actually test a number of things. Think of it as a market test. If we were a commercial company putting something out there, the market test to try different experiments, different ways to attempt road charging, and then with the evaluation, have enough information that comes out of it to feed back in the final report to the legislators of what worked, what didn't. And we do expect that some things that you may want to try, and we should try, are things that in the end, when we try it with the public, may not work or may not work as well as others. But that's important information in the bigger picture so that in phase 4, when a report is delivered, that report can contain those lessons learned in a microcosm of California. And so as we move forward, again, we're going to be working with you over the next several months to get the framework of that demonstration put together. And then in phase 2, the actual getting a test ready, the methodologies and stuff that you recommend. And it's important to understand that whatever we go forward with is based on your recommendations. And every step of this process, we're cross-checking it back to your guidance to make sure we're doing what you've instructed us to do. The caveats are that there's obviously, as in all real-world situations, there's a budget and a time frame. So what can we really do within the budget and time frame as the only restrictions? And then in phase 3, the actual testing, and in the testing there will be an independent evaluation so that the evaluation criteria that you decide will be used to evaluate how well it performs. So we can give those lessons learned in phase 4, that independent evaluation report, our report on how it quantifies the results and provides information for carrying forward. And again, each step of the process goes back to your guidance and your instructions of what you want us to do. So the outputs, the immediate output at the end of this phase is your report and recommendations to CalSTA. Phase 2 gets to be the pilot test plan and evaluation study and the kind of green light to say, yes, we're ready to start the test. And then in phase 3, the actual test and evaluation. And then in phase 4, the report. And then what happens after phase 4 with that report will be carried forward to look at what's the basis for policy and direction to the legislation if it goes that far. We really aren't anticipating, we're not going to prejudge anything. We want to make sure that we can give solid guidance is essentially the point that we're here to help you with and to help you with the reports and help you through this process. So at a glance, this is what the road that we're going to be traveling down, and we look forward to working hand in hand and partnering with you through to get all your views and to get all the information that you can impart on it from each of your specialties, so that what we can put together is a robust test and test plan. Are there any questions?
Right, and as you describe it, it's an iterative process, and that's the way you make innovation. You have to take that risk, you try something, see if it works, and that's the whole concept of the pilot. But the reality is, if we were doing this in private, we could make those mistakes and then move on. But we know we're going to be dealing in a very public venue. So when, I don't want to say a mistake, but when we try something and it doesn't quite work the way we thought, we're going to learn from that and have that feedback loop. But will we have a communication strategy? Because somebody will spin that out of control. Somebody will say, oh, look, it didn't work, and it take a life of its own. So what are the kinds of things I'm not asking what are they, but how do we, and do we have a plan for, we can't control everything out there. We can't control how it's spun, but to communicate that this is a process, this is an innovative, and so we can have some control over our message and communicating with folks to get them to understand the iterative trial and error aspects of it will make it a stronger outcome.
Great question, Pam. And we actually have a subject on that we're going to address a little bit later. So the core of that answer is going to be addressed shortly. But the answer is yes. In fact, there's really, if you would, two sides of the communications picture that we're working with. One is an immediate strategy on getting the messaging out and how that's done, and we're working closely with the CTC and with Lucas PA to do that. And that's something that's ongoing. It's not finished yet. We've got elements of it started, and we're hopefully within the next week or so, moving that forward. And by the next meeting, we should be able to give you a full report on that. The second part of that is, something that we do have in the plan, which is what we call baselining, getting telephone surveys, focus groups, get an idea of attitudes from the public so that then we could look at better ways to communicate to them as we go forward during the test period, and a communication strategy that parallels that line all the way through, to answer your question directly, to ensure that we do have the messaging to say, here's how it's working, here's what's happening in a very transparent way, but getting the right messaging back out to the public in terms that they'll understand.
And I just triggered it too, that the public is a partner with us. As we try something, they're the ones providing the feedback, and we're responding to them. So that's not a failure.
No, in fact...
No, I know, but somebody may characterize it as failure, but we're going to...
And, we're going to talk a bit in a short while about some of the other experiences, and not everything has been a success. There have been things that have been tried, things that have been tried in Minnesota, where they used smartphones or cell phones to do this with, interfacing with the vehicle. And the end result was some of it didn't work very well. They retried that again in Oregon. And again, we had some shortcomings in that technology because it just really wasn't for prime time yet. There were issues that had to be worked out. And I'm saying these were technical issues. That's not layering on top other things that may be, equity issues, things that may be privacy issues with it. So, there's lots of dimensions to it, and whatever. But again, I think for your sake and putting your mind a little bit at ease is the fact that yes, the test can be designed to look at different aspects with different subgroups and subtests, so that it may work, it may not work. We don't know that. It's really the test will prove that. But the idea that in trying to do this is, in just like this committee with different views, as robustly as possible, trying to get the best answers for the legislators and for the public of how well this works. And that's what we're committed to here.
Right. And that's the message we need to keep communicating to the public.
Yes. And, and certainly in the short term, one of the key messages I think we have to carry, and David's not here right now, Assemblymember Chu, the idea of just what shape our roads are in. And the deferring of maintenance, and over the last month, I've been really quite surprised and quite pleased to see the press that we've gotten so far on the program, because the focus has been out of some place like Chico, talking about something like chip setting the road. In other words, putting gravel and putting some bonding down to hold it to the surface, that they don't have enough money to do that. They have to defer maintenance. And then out of Monterey, talking about how they've dropped really to the bottom of the list in regards to being able to just fill potholes. So there's, obviously this committee is coming at the right time, and hopefully, we can come out with the right test and evaluation to give decision makers the right answers.
Any other members of the committee? Questions, comments? Lauren?
Sorry. Thank you. It's nice meeting you. I just have a question. I don't know actually who it's for, but I'm wondering in this relationship with the consultants and the subcontractors, who's the client in the relationship? Is it this committee? Is it the CTC, Caltrans, STA? When there's actual direction going and the work's being done, where's that direction coming from?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a shot at that. The actual
You will.
Yes, the actual client is Caltrans with respect to the contractual relationships, but there is a very collaborative effort, as was described, going on between Caltrans, the California Transportation Commission, and the California State Transportation Agency. For the first phase, I would say in real terms, the TAC is the client, because clearly the effort that we're going to be undertaking in this first phase, while the TAC is going through its efforts to put together a program, most of the communications efforts is going to be directed at what's going on here with this group. So while the contractual relationship is with Caltrans, clearly you're going to be a major client in the first phase of the effort.
And so, excuse me. And so, will they be taking direction directly from us? Will it be mediated through the chairman, through you?
We are the commission serves as staff to the TAC, so it will actually be direction that you would provide. If the TAC agrees on direction, then we will carry that through to the consultant.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, Lauren, just to add to that, all anybody has to do is read the text of Senate Bill 1077, and that's pretty much the guiding principle. This task force provides the direction pursuant to the law. And so ultimately, I look at the task force as the client, even whatever the contractual relationships are. But you ask a very good question and an important one. Jeff.
And Lauren, I will tell you that from my team, we see the number one client being the project. The contractual arrangements are contractual arrangements, but how do we best serve you, and how do we best serve the state in regards to carrying out a successful program? So we have this, we are looking at what's best for the state of California as we go in and assume this assignment as the superordinate that sits above everything else. Obviously, over the next several months, in phase one, you are really the client. We've assigned special arrangements to make sure that we can get the communications that we need, and we'll be with you throughout this whole process.
Any other questions or comments for Jack? It's not the last you've heard of him today, but we'll turn it back over to Carrie.
Thank you, Chair. As Committee Member O'Connor aptly pointed out, communications is really a critical issue that we have to address at the TAC level as well as when they start deployment of the pilot program. So one of the critical charges of the TAC is gathering public comment and development on the road charge program. We are working in a coordinated and thoughtful manner with Caltrans and D'Artagnan to develop a public outreach strategy that will provide ample opportunity for stakeholders and the public to participate in the development of the pilot program. However, as kind of illustrated in Jack's presentation, we are very transportation-centric. Caltrans, CTC, our consultant. So I really want to reach out to all of you as members of the TAC that have other stakeholders, interest groups that might be interested in participating in the process, want more information about the road charge program. So in the next week, I'll be reaching out and trying to get stakeholder information from you. So make sure that we are reaching out and making sure that not only transportation interest groups are involved, but also having the wider general public and your special interest groups involved in the program. One of the main portals for the TAC to communicate information is through an independent website. Currently, our website is hosted on the CTC website. However, we've engaged with Caltrans to develop this independent website. The information on it will provide, obviously, our meeting material, FAQs, fact sheets, as articles come up or research materials. Those will all be linked. It will hopefully be interactive to be able to have an opportunity to take public comment through the internet, the website, as well as get some feedback as how the website's working for them. During the process of identifying and establishing the TAC, the Commission received a great deal of interest from a broad range of groups and individuals. That, coupled with SB 1077 requirements for the TAC to consult with highway users groups and transportation stakeholders in the preparation of the pilot program, we have formulated a road charge work group. This work group will be headed up by Ann Mayer, who's Executive Director of the Riverside County Transportation Commission, and will consist of representatives from the business sector, equity advocates, environmental organizations, telecommunications and technology, data security and privacy, as well as vehicle users, vehicle manufacturers, and fuel distributors. The working group will serve as a resource to the TAC, providing industry advice and comments from their respective areas of expertise. The working group will be constituted prior to the March committee meeting, and based on subject matters at the next meeting, may be providing comments to the TAC to consider. So with that, as Gary Gutierrez mentioned, D'Artagnan Consulting will be providing technical assistance to the TAC. One of the areas they will be helping us in is the public participation process. Jack Opiola from D'Artagnan will provide a brief overview of the support they will be providing in the upcoming year regarding the TAC public participation.
And before Jack goes into that, just this whole idea of this working group is 15 members. Each of you kind of bring a different silo, if you will. You know, we're trying to blend those all here. But there's so many other people that have interest in this. This is where we felt having this working group to be able to provide insight here in the form of testimony or dialogue would be so important. So if there are organizations or individuals that you might think of that, you know, are not sitting here or that should be part of that, please let Carrie or Susan or Will know, or myself, so we can make sure that we include those. The most success that we're going to have at this process is being as open, big tent as possible, and listening to the public. And that's the key thing, is listening to what the people of California say. Sure, they're doing it in different states, but this is California. And we got to make sure that we're addressing California's needs. Steve. Oh, and yeah, thank you, Steve.
If I could just add, I mean, I just wanted to echo that thought. I think that, you know, I wouldn't want this entire process to be tainted with the impression that things were rushed through or people's voices weren't heard. So I think that's very important. I think it's a wise path to go down, and you know, I'll certainly be thinking of people to participate in that work group. And Mayor is great, and I think the more inclusive this is, the better. And the more stakeholders, even those that might be opposed in the beginning or think different thoughts, you know, that's all part of this. So I echo that strongly.
Thank you, and welcome, by the way.
Thank you.
Ishwar?
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a quick question for clarification. So I just heard that the consultant group is going to be of technical assistance to TAC. Now, focusing just on RC design, when and how does this assistance begin, and what will be the formal shape of this assistance?
Well, we anticipate the assistance coming at every meeting. So if there's a subject matter that comes up that's addressing a technology issue, we would hope that members of this TAC, this working group, would come forward and present perspective from their industry. So if we have vehicle manufacturers, we would have somebody from the vehicle manufacturers provide some type of testimony, so you have an idea of what they're thinking in their particular industry to help in your deliberations. So every month we're planning on having them attend the meeting and have an opportunity to talk to you.
Will?
Mr. Chair, if I could just expand on that a bit, but beyond that, for the TAC, if there's anything that you need, any assistance that you require or questions that you have in the interim between meetings, please contact the commission. You can start with me, but Carrie will probably be getting involved in the response, and we can bring to bear either the consultant to directly deal with your concerns or questions, or we'll provide whatever information you need. So it's not just a once a month opportunity to come before the public in this kind of a setting. If you have issues and concerns and questions that you want addressed, please contact Commission staff.
Is anybody going to do a capacity analysis regarding the capacity the consumer would have for taxes or for fees, whether it be piling on, whether it's a road usage charge, whether it's an extra tax or user fee on tires or on cars, or has anybody looked at this, or are we going to have any feedback on that? I mean, much the same way that I'm sure that the industry did it when they had to recycle everything from soda cans to light bulbs, to TV screens to computers. Be nice to know.
I would respond, David, that I think that the issue of the level of charge or whatever is really not an immediate issue. It's obviously going to be a concern, and there will be questions about that. If we want to, if the TAC wants to, go into that issue, certainly we can provide information. But I don't think that we've talked specifically about this being a replacement to the gas tax. So in terms of the actual dollars or the level of burden or whatever on the public, we haven't planned to incorporate into the process. If the TAC wants information relative to that, we'll certainly do our best to provide it.
Well, perhaps I took a little sidetrack thinking that if the bottom line is X amount of dollars is needed to fix it, what's the capacity for raising it and how do you do it?
No, I think, David, you raised an excellent point. In fact, just somebody today asked me, so what's the amount being contemplated? And you hear Oregon a penny, penny and a half, but I think a legitimate question needs to be, are we just trying to set a fee, and obviously this is not what we're talking about yet in this process, but it's a question that's going to have to be answered by somebody. Clearly, there is nothing that restricts this task force as part of its package of recommendations, frankly, to the CTC and ultimately to the Secretary of Transportation, pursuant to SB 1077, from weighing in on that. And one of those issues could be just as simple as if the gas tax had been indexed and we were at what would be the optimal amount being charged today so we could actually get to that $50 billion number that Assemblymember Chu talked about or John Casey did earlier today. If that were the case, what would that number be? I've also heard people saying, how can you be charging this idea of a road? We pay more road taxes than anybody in any other state. Well, that may or may not be true, but the question becomes, if you were to get rid of all of the taxes that are being paid, the federal excise tax, the sales tax on gas, the tax on this, the tax on that everybody thinks of when they buy a gallon of gas, then what would that per mile charge be? And is that what's going to be included? I think those are legitimate issues that at some point, and I don't know the Caltrans consultants' charge. I haven't read the scope of work as of yet. But I do think at some point some economists ought to be able to step in and provide some expertise for us to give us that analysis. Clearly, Caltrans has staff. I'm thinking of Keck, for example. That's his full-time job, is just basically running those numbers, to kind of get a presentation to us as to what those numbers might be if you were to replace everything with a mile charge, et cetera. Because clearly what we're doing here in California is just the first step. The whole country's looking at this as we move forward.
If I could add on that also, I think it's an excellent question as well. I think the public doesn't parse out all the different taxes and fees that maybe the inside baseball people look at. They're looking at the total impact across all sorts of things that they're paying as a motorist and for other things. And even the information that Caltrans is putting together shows a comparison of a gas tax to your coffee consumption and your cable bill and all that. Of course, the gas tax they're looking at there is only one slice of the overall motorist tax pie. So I think it behooves us to be open and honest and inclusive and recognizing that that's part of the mix.
Excellent point. So thank you, Dave, for bringing that up. Richard?
I'd like to request, this is the first I'm hearing about the working group, and sounds like it could play a useful role, but I wonder if you could bring us a two-pager or something in writing that describes the composition, roles, open meetings, whatever the details are.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, the idea in this working group is to just open the tent up for those that are interested. I'd like to see people that hate this idea in that working group as well. I think it's important to hear all sides. I don't know if I should use the word hate, but
skeptical.
Skeptical, yes, that would probably be a more appropriate term here.
I just wanted to make one quick comment, which is that I commute across the Bay Bridge virtually every workday, and the $4 to $6 I spend a day just driving across that one thing dwarfs the gas tax, and so I think it is actually really important from a public impact perspective to look at it holistically and not get lost in pennies here and pennies there, because it's the total that matters.
Excellent point. Kerry, back to you. Oh, we'll go into Jack now.
Okay. As mentioned earlier, and what Kerry has introduced, there is two really movements afoot on the communication side. And Pam, this goes directly to your question earlier in regards to the fact that we have a strategic plan that's being put together that is in the process of being put together. And helping us put that together is Lucas Public Affairs. And I'd like to introduce Donna Lucas, because she is here, just so that you know who. For those that don't know Donna, I think I found that a lot of people in California do know Donna from her work. But let me introduce Donna. And Donna, we've got the list of the things that we're working on and honing that into a strategic plan. So you may want to say a few words on that strategic plan.
Well, thank you, Jack, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and working on one of my favorite issues in California, transportation. And I know many of you sitting here. Just a little bit about our firm, and we're delighted that Jack brought us in to help bring a California perspective to this conversation, which I think is really critical. And for all the Californians in the room, we all know what we say. California is different than any other place in the world, so you got to always look at it through a California lens. Our firm has worked in public policy issues for over 30 years. I myself have had 3 different firms. In between, have served on the staff of 2 governors, Governor Deukmejian and Governor Schwarzenegger. Have worked a lot in transportation issues through those years. We currently represent a cadre of clients, from corporate clients to public clients. We represent CalSTRS and State Fund. You may know those 2 government clients. And we also represent foundations, including the California Endowment, one of the largest foundations in the state. So we do a lot of work in education, health care, equity issues. We've worked a lot in community issues, business issues. So we know the spectrum of people who need to be part of this conversation. So we're very delighted to be part of that. I just wanted to mention, you'll see 2 other members of my team working with this. Julie Marengo, who has worked with me off and on for 20 years, came out of the League of Cities in the city of Sacramento, knows transportation issues very well, very top-notch strategist, writer. And Alex Barrios, who came out of the Senate, had worked with Norma Torres, had worked with the state controller. Alex is a communications expert and specialist both in California media, as well as he's bilingual and has worked a lot with the Spanish-speaking media, which I also think is a very important component for our outreach on this, not only in the Latino community, but also in all the communities in California. And I think we have to really ensure that our strategy does take that into account.
Thank you very much, Donna. The other half of this is going to be the baseline planning. And by baseline planning, I mean getting a fix of what do Californians think. We do know there's been past studies. I've worked in past studies in Southern California in 2009. Steve, you and I interacted on that express travel study when you were on the steering committee there. But some of that is old information now. A lot of water has gone under the bridge. A lot more has been out in public media, and the understanding may have changed. So we're going to want to get back and get a fix on where that stands, and that'll be in the form of telephone surveys. And you will get to shape those telephone surveys, because the questions that get developed from the team will go through you to get your inputs on to make sure we're casting what information you would like to see developed. And then focus groups. And again, you'll have a chance to shape the focus groups as we go along. And then other public interfaces as far as any type of listening tours around the state as the program fleshes out for further, plus some in-depth analysis to look at some branding exercises for what terms catch with the public, which ones don't, how they should be delivered, how do we best reach the public in all the communities for all the modes of transportation in California. And some of that is back down into branding exercises that come later. And part of that will also be, with that branding exercise, probably a development of a new website that would then carry the branding forward and be more dynamic in regards to getting ready for the actual demonstration, where we can get public opinions back in through the website. So that's, in effect, the 2 arms of this: the strategic arm, and then again this communications baselining approach. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have on it, but we do have a presentation coming up on communications too, so with a bit more of lessons learned and what we have seen in other states and other areas in regards to communications. Okay, thank you very much.
Moving on. Agenda item 7 is the policy dimensions and tasks ahead. Over the next year, the TAC will be grappling with a variety of decisions, policy decisions, that will frame the development of the pilot program. Shannon Crum from D'Artagnan Consulting will provide an overview of policy decisions and that lie before us and the path ahead.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here, not only because the weather is gorgeous and it was not at home, but also I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be working with this group. I spent 10 years with the Texas Department of Transportation doing transportation planning, project programming, and then towards the end of my time there, I directed the Research and Technology Implementation Office and also the Operational Excellence Office. In that time, I was fortunate enough to be able to convene several committees and task forces and work groups. And the ones that I always enjoyed working with the most were the ones that were not populated by transportation people, so that there was a diversity of views and backgrounds and opinions and really good ideas. Somebody stole the clicker. Okay.
Sounds like home.
Now I'm ready to go. Okay. So you'll be seeing me many months. I think one of the ways that the agendas have been shaped is that in the morning sessions I'll come and present a little bit of background on some of the policy considerations that have to do with the topic that's really being addressed that month. Today's a little bit different because it's the kickoff. It's the first time I'm meeting you and the first time you're meeting me, and so there's a little bit of background today. So I've laid out some objectives for that in terms of really identify the decisions that have been specified in SB 1077 already. But I want to move forward from that and talk about the framework that we're going to use for considering road charging policy as we move forward. What I really don't want to do is sit and lecture to you for 45 minutes every month, because that's just, it has to be painful for you. So really to establish a framework where we can talk about laying out the topics, really getting into a couple of key decisions, having some good discussion, and then taking some action moving forward and moving on to the next topic the next month, if that's agreeable to everybody. If you want me to lecture you for 45 minutes every month, I can. All right? But I'd really rather not. Okay. This is not the last time you will see this chart today, but I thought it was important to just start with a reminder about why we're all here. And Caltrans prepared this. Really what it does is it talks about the divergence in the growth of demand for transportation, which is the blue line, and the revenue that will be generated from collecting gas taxes, and that's the orange line. And for a whole lot of reasons, many of them policy-driven, none of them transportation policy-driven. A lot of them are driven by energy security, some by international trade, some by environmental policy. Gas taxes will decline over the coming years. Actually, they've already started to, because vehicles are becoming more fuel efficient, more gas efficient, or not using gasoline at all. Hydrogen fuel cells are coming online. Electric motors are already widely available, and this week in Germany there's a really cool test of a saltwater powered motor. So gas taxes are going to remain a challenge even as demand increases.
I'm sorry, a real quick question.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just because I know we are going to see this chart at other times and it'll be used for various purposes, are these national or California numbers?
Brady, those are California numbers.
California numbers.
Yeah.
And the and the fuel efficiency, so that's gas consumption, actual gas purchased.
That's gas tax revenue. So it is related to gas purchase because it's based on number of gallons.
So it's revenue recognizing the fluctuating rate of gas taxes that we have here?
It's only the flat state excise fee, isn't it? Gary?
Actually, I'm going to introduce Stephen Keck to give a little background.
And I'm
on that.
sorry, we don't have to dive too far into it. We can talk a little bit offline if
certainly,
needed. I just want to make sure I understood what numbers are being represented.
Right, I want to nail it down for you. This represents revenue collected on the base 18-cent tax. It has not changed since 1994. So when we look at the I can't tell if that's a red or orange line. We're already seeing a divergence in the solid line, which is actuals. And then as we move forward with the dotted lines, those are projections.
Okay, great. Now I'll ask you offline a little bit. I think that in the last fiscal year or the current numbers are actually showing an increase in gasoline purchases in California.
That's correct.
So there may be a few more hiccups to this chart as we go along.
Well, yeah, certainly as we update it, the lines will change.
Similarly, by the way, there's also no axis, no vertical axis on this curve, and that
correct.
would be helpful.
Well, no, actually, the vertical axis is not there on purpose. And the reason is this is a conceptual chart to illustrate the dangers that we have going forward. We don't want to, or maybe you do, get embroiled into whether VMT growth is going to be 1%, 0.5%, negative 0.25%. What we're trying to illustrate with this graph is that there is a divergence between the miles traveled and the fuel consumed, which will create a gap in the revenue.
And conceptually, I appreciate that, although I think for our purposes it might be good to see the real numbers.
Yeah. You bet.
Okay, so Senate Bill 1077 lays out 4 basic charges to this group. The first 2 have to do with learning and gathering information and a lot of listening and having conversations with the public. Items 3 and 4 are where you really have to identify the decisions that you want to take and recommendations that you're moving forward to the pilot. Okay, so I'm not going to read through all of these. Again, they're in your briefing book. They are directly out of the legislation, but task 3 is to recommend some road charging approaches and pilot design parameters. And then item number 4 is making those recommendations for evaluation criteria, really to define what success looks like in the pilot. Okay, so the question is, why worry about policy? And I want to approach policy in terms of looking at it as the principle for the action that you're going to take. So policy is a principle of action. And the whole idea is that it's important to get the foundation right as you move forward, because the technical stuff is really cool. And it's really easy to get sucked in to looking at the really cool gadgets and the really cool things that you can use to implement a road usage charge or a road charge. If you put the technology first, though, and you don't have a really clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish, you can come up with a solution or a program that, in the end, does not meet the needs of California at all. And so it really is worrying about policy just to make sure we start with clearly identifying what you want to accomplish, and then going out and finding the technology that meets those goals or that can achieve those goals. All right. This is my amoeba chart. In the context of a fully mature statewide road usage fee program, there are a whole bunch of policy dimensions that do need to be fully fleshed out in order to make sure you're successful. And they all interrelate with one another. They're all moving parts. If you change one, it impacts how another behaves. I thought about making these sort of bouncing bubbles bouncing off of one another, but I thought that would make people motion sick, so I did not do it. The good news is that to develop a successful pilot, you don't have to address everything. We just need to address some things. And what I hope to do this morning is really sort of build a fence around what must be addressed moving forward. Okay. So, the bill takes care of a few things for us. It very clearly calls out and makes some decisions that the TAC really will have no input into. For instance, replace or supplement the gas tax. And it says replace, right? That leads to some questions, though. And I left this blank because I was hoping at this point you would start to chime in with some questions related to how are we going to replace the gas tax. But it leads to further questions. So the first one is the goal ultimately for a road usage charge or a road charge to be sustainable transportation revenue? Is that your ultimate objective? Or are there other objectives that come into play? Are there equity objectives? Are there environmental objectives? And that's a question that we need to answer. Should rates differ by location or time of day? And the bill says no. What the bill doesn't address is whether the rates should differ by type of vehicle. So should trucks be included? Gasoline-powered trucks, because it does clearly reference the gas tax, not the diesel tax. But should trucks be included? Should RVs be included? Should motorcycles be included? Or are we just talking about passenger cars? And for the purposes of the pilot, that's a decision that you're going to need to make. And I would recommend for that one quicker, sooner rather than later. Should motorists have a choice of the method that they're using to report the distance they've traveled? And the legislation says yes, they should have a choice, and they should have at least one method that doesn't rely on any location data. So then the questions become, well, how many options will they have? How many options should we test? And what are they? Should we just do simple odometer readings? Should we test GPS-enabled options? Should we test in-vehicle telematics? How should we do this, and how many should we do? And my inclination is to say test 17, and then I come back to schedule budget, schedule budget. So really paring those down and identifying the options to test that are going to provide the most information to take back in the final report and analysis. The next question that the legislation really addresses are what privacy protection requirements should the system include? And it speaks to this idea that collecting the minimum amount of personal information necessary to carry out a road charge system. The first question that I asked was, well, what's the minimum information necessary in order to be able to carry out that work? A lot of that depends on the types of charges you decide will be collected. Are you going to allow deductions for out-of-state mileage? Are you going to allow deductions for mileage on private roads rather than public roads? Those kinds of things. And answering those questions is necessary to really define what the minimum amount of information required to manage the system is. And then the next question that is very clearly identified in the legislation has to do with the data security requirements. It talks about having processes in place for collecting, managing, storing, transmitting, and destroying the data to ensure security. So how do you monitor that? How do you audit that? How do you make sure that's happening? Is that something that you approach from a technology basis, that the technology has certain encryption methods in it, or from a data management perspective, once the data has been transmitted to whichever organization will be responsible for ultimately collecting the data? Do you have customers, consumers, citizens opt in or opt out of certain data elements? Again, all discussions and questions that this group needs to be thinking about and addressing as we move forward to design and make recommendations about a pilot system. So, any comments or thoughts so far? Yes. And please interrupt me. And if I'm like,
this
in a
is
zone,
free-flowing. Just
yeah. If I'm in a zone, because I go there sometimes, just wave your arm and
I have a question regarding including types of vehicles in it. And maybe Will can answer this one. As stated in SB 1077, it specifically focuses on gasoline. So I'm not saying we are part of it or we want to be part of it yet, but if diesel was part of it, would that require some sort of statutory amendment to 1077, or do we have flexibility for that?
And to add to that, I mean, electric cars. I mean.
Certainly, whatever happens at the end of the day will be up to the legislature in terms of how they would decide if they choose to do this, implement a full-scale change in financing mechanisms. I think you have the flexibility, again, to look at this in any way that you think makes sense. There, as Eric points out, there are not restrictions in place, so if you want to look at those other potential funding mechanisms, that's certainly up to you. We can, the recommendations that will go forward will be from this TAC.
And if I could just add to that, I think that was a really good question, and I like the fact that the policy questions were put in here. I mean, one could read the charge from SB 1077 that this is a very technical kind of focus, and it is, and that's part of it. But I think the policy questions are inherent, and moving forward, whatever happens will require future legislative action. And I think it's important for this group to provide our input and to provide our thinking into deliberations that will continue, and there will be broader public policy debates, including what are we trying to replace or not replace, and what gets covered and not covered. You know, I think that's a very legitimate issue.
Okay. Yes.
I would add just one small comment. These are policy questions for California. We're designing a program in California, but the policy questions also arose in Oregon.
Yes.
They're under debate in
Yes.
Illinois, where they're considering
Yes.
such a fee. In New York, they tried a truck-only program, and it didn't get approved.
And they're
So
retrying it right now.
It's valuable to us to know how these same policy questions were addressed in other places.
Yes.
Even though the context is different.
Yes, and Jack will be speaking on particularly the international examples this afternoon, and then as we move through the list of topics in the coming 6 or 8 months, and I'll show you the proposed schedule at the end of this presentation, we'll go more in depth on U.S. examples and international examples that are very closely related to that month's topics. You've kind of got two options. I can open the fire hose today and knock everybody down and make you not want to come back next month, or I can just say we have a plan to get there. Trust me. And you might not like that answer either, so if you have a better answer, let me know. So yes, Jack will be addressing some of the international policy lessons learned and technology lessons learned this afternoon, and then as we move forward on specific topics, we'll have, again, the idea is that I start in the morning with kind of laying out the policy framework on that topic and what we know and what we've learned and what we think, and then the technology comes in the afternoon, or the technical stuff, the system architecture and that sort of thing. These are, and I will say that there will be a lot more information in your briefing books than maybe we'll necessarily reference in the morning lectures. Okay, so again, why worry about it? And it really comes down to that the decisions that this group makes on the policy questions that you decide to address. And again, you don't have to decide to address everything that a fully operational system might include. Really should be in the context of testing the possibilities. So to come back to what vehicles to include, testing whether it makes sense to include RVs. Does it make sense to include trucks? What would that look like if it's just the gas tax? How do you include diesel-powered vehicles? So testing those possibilities or choosing not to with a constant focus on meeting the needs of a sustainable, equitable, effective revenue source for California. Coming back to another point that someone made, a lot of these things, if California moves forward with a fully implemented road usage charge or road charge, will require legislative action or action from the transportation agency. It's not something that you're going to decide in the next 8 months and then that's how it is forever. But you have a huge role in laying the groundwork for how that moves forward, for providing the information for the decisions that they ultimately make and the legislation that they ultimately pass. And you are the decision makers for this pilot. And so the policy that goes into this pilot really does lay out the next 10 or 15 or 20 years of efforts on this activity. And then so it comes back to deciding what to test, how to test, lays that foundation.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Sure. So the first bullet point really sort of reminded me, when you use the word sustainable and equitable, those are really those are important, and I don't know exactly what our metrics are for that, or what sort of data we rely on in order to try to test whether we're achieving those values.
Right.
So I'm curious What's
So-
the approach for determining whether something we do is more or less equitable?
We'll come back to that, and we do have a transportation economist who will help with the sustainability question. I think that a lot of it is it's part of this group's charge to really talk about the equity, and a lot of times equity is discussed in the context of urban drivers versus rural drivers. Is a road charge unfair to rural drivers because they drive longer distances? And we
I think it has more dimensions than that.
yeah, it does, and it has many more dimensions than that. There are definitely economic dimensions and gender dimensions and a lot of other dimensions, age dimensions, and so we come back to that through the course of the next few months. Okay. All right, so this is the proposal for moving forward in terms of the topics that are going to be addressed, and working on the format of this so that you don't have to tilt your head in order to be able to read it. But this month is really just kind of outlining. I know. You can just tilt the projector, outlining the policy direction that's already set, the decisions that are already made in Senate Bill 1077. And in a couple of minutes, we do not have an action item on today's agenda, but in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask if we can at least agree in principle to a couple of things that have been outlined in the legislation. Next month, we'll be getting much more into the technology. And I believe there's a presentation on telematics. There's a presentation on several of the devices that are available, some of the technical architecture. And so we'll be really looking at some of the more technical topics. Yeah.
Question. On this particular topic, during the month of March, what is the beginning and ending activities of this particular phase? What do we start with during March beginning, and what do we end with during March? What exactly happens in terms of technology? Are we going to consider, finalize the requirements for the design? Are we going to select the technology? Or what exactly is going to be decided during the month of March?
We will not be finalizing design in March. I think the goal for March is to present you with an array of options, provide a lot of background information, have some discussion, and then come back at the beginning of April and take some action.
For example, Eshwar, what we're hoping we can do, I know when you and I chatted on the phone, you've got a presentation that you offer talking about the future of vehicle telematics. So we're going to try to carve some time so we could give you that opportunity. It's really to educate the task force on the various options that are out there. Because these are important things. Clearly, as Lee Tien and I have chatted on the phone as well, you know, privacy is top notch to make sure that's there. But then, as we'll learn later on, and as Marty and I heard in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, there's some areas in the market where people will want to be able to utilize that technology because, as I may have shared before, you know, you could go get a free cup of Starbucks. If you just show up, they'll pay your miles to go to their store. So there's, and that's the idea maybe of making this open source, so you can have those kind of market interests. But then we have to have that opt-out as well. So we're going to look at all of those pieces. We're also going to get a presentation, I don't know if it's been finalized yet, but on vehicle automation. We wanted to have that be part of this discussion because so important in the task force's work is to understand what's coming in the future. And we're talking about the future. It's not like 50 years from now. It's almost like next week, as you well know. And so these are part of the pieces that we'll be discussing and really briefing the task force. So when we do give a recommendation, it's going to be informed and more than likely have several options included.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate how you, excuse me, how you called these the policy questions, and I think that's the guts of what we need to ultimately settle on. And I know there's a process to be probably to be rolled out that gets us there. But I was wondering, maybe at the risk of jumping the gun, if you could tell me how we get to addressing these policy issues within this within this calendar. It's not obvious to me. Maybe it all comes at some great sort of
epiphany.
Well, if not epiphany, at least perhaps a climactic event somewhere down here in the excuse me, somewhere down here in the at the right hand or bottom or whichever way you're holding this of the chart. But it's not clear to me how the really important stuff, which is here, gets decided here.
Okay. So again, kind of the topics that are laid out in the schedule, or the activities that are laid out in this schedule, the idea is that in March you get a lot of background about what the available technologies are and what the system architecture might be. And then that's the technical part of it. And then we come back and discuss, okay, well, how does that fit with the equity goals that we have? How does that fit with the funding goals that we have? How does that fit with all of these other decisions that we've kind of taken in order to choose the most appropriate technology? And it's iterative. It might be that we have a discussion in March and then we get to May and we go, oh.
Okay, well, I definitely get that it's iterative, but I'm kind of going back to something I think you said early on, which was, let's not get lost in the weeds of all the whiz-bang technology stuff, and then it turns out the next meeting is the whiz-bang technology stuff. So, I'm wondering if we're going to get taken through the weeds before we get to the important stuff. Anyway, there may not be an answer to that. I'm just giving you one of my concerns.
Yeah, and I was sharing the same thought and was going to ask the same question. So I think trying to make sure that we all understand when some of those policy issues are going to be addressed and how they're going to be done. I mean, we have a meeting set up here where we're still seemingly at the very beginning stages of all this and learning and sharing information to begin with. But we're going to really need to roll up the sleeves very soon on some of these things. And so that would be helpful to make sure that we have an understanding and ahead of the meetings perhaps also, that, hey, this is the meeting where, these couple of decisions need to be made. And some of it is iterative, but some of it also builds on prior decisions.
Right.
We don't want to go too far down the wrong path. So.
Right.
And let me, if I could just add, and nothing that we decide, let's say we decide on something in March, we have the right as a group to go back and tweak it prior to our final recommendation, because we're going to keep learning as we go.
Yes. And there will be new technical information provided at each meeting. And again, the other option is to just lock you all into a room for 3 weeks and, and force feed you. So we're not going to do that. So I don't know whether this helps address any of those questions or concerns at all, but the idea is that every month we'll have a look ahead. So next month we can expect to reach some decision points on these particular policy topics, having discussed some of the technology, and they're you'll notice they're very high level at this point. It's are we pursuing open systems or closed systems? And today you can't answer that because we haven't told you yet what an open system or a closed system is. But we're going to talk a lot about it next month, and it will be a lot of information in the briefing books. How many reporting options? And we're not to the point yet of which reporting options, but really kind of ballpark how many should we be considering in light of the fact that we want to make sure we have options for protecting privacy, we want to make sure that we have a reasonable amount of equity for the population, and that we also, and I didn't put it in the presentation, keep it simple so that people can understand and it's not challenging. Another decision point that we're proposing for next month is a very huge policy question for you. How much interoperability do you want to pursue? Do you want to be interoperable with tolling systems in California, with other states? Do you want to be interoperable with road charging systems in other states, with congestion charging systems in other locations? How do you want to approach that? And then I think the other decision point that we get to next month, having looked a little bit at technology, we can provide a little bit more background on kind of the economics behind it. But do you have differing rates by type of vehicle? So our electric vehicles charge differently from gasoline-powered vehicles. Our fuel-efficient vehicles charge differently from gas guzzlers. Our trucks included, our three-axle vehicles included, our RVs included. Yeah.
Shannon, can I ask you to back up? Because I feel I share Lauren's concerns, and I also want to go back to Lee's earlier question. I'm a big believer in alternative. So first of all, thank you. I appreciate lead thinking is very important, and we're going to, I think, count on you guys a lot for that. But I also feel that already it's looking like your wise principle of starting with policy and not getting lost in the technical weeds is starting to get lost. I'm concerned that we should have a better sense of some alternatives about how we might stage these discussions, knowing that they are going to be iterative. And what are the questions that would be good to have an understanding about first in order to be able to later, et cetera. And I would, as Lauren said, I agree with Lauren that we should have a sense of which policy questions would come up, for first pass, for iterative pass, et cetera, at which stages.
Okay.
So that's number one. And then number two, on Lee's question, I wasn't fully satisfied that, where that shows up here, and just to, my perspective on this is that too often social equity becomes an add-on after the fact. And I think what, the best practice and what I hope we all agree on is that we should be integrating those questions throughout. So I'd like to see a front-loaded discussion of what we think those key questions are, and then see how those issues are going to come up again and again.
And I can certainly provide a breakdown of kind of when I think each set of questions would be appropriate to address. What we've done so far is just kind of looked 1 month ahead. So kind of the questions for next month would be having to do with should there be standards established if vendors are brought on board? How should technology be certified? That sort of thing. You'll notice so I can break that all the way through the proposed topic schedule. You'll notice that there isn't a month where we talk about privacy or a month where we talk about equity. And from my perspective, that's because both of those topics are part of technology. They're part of organizational design. They're part of the communications baseline. They're part of the business case. They're in part of each of those things. They're not separate, standalone concepts. And so, again, we'll be addressing those decisions every single time as we go through these different topics. So it is very iterative. There are some things we won't have a definitive answer on until close to the end. Some things we can decide next month, like how many methods do you think you want to test?
Let me just try one more pass at this. I feel like we're being asked to agree with a course of action for this process. And, my experience is you go down methodically, and then everything starts to get into a rush of decisions that may not be taken as thoughtfully as they could have been. So again, my request would be for not just to break out how you see these different things going and how the questions build on each other, but to provide a couple of alternatives that we could actually say that we're comfortable with one rather than another.
Okay.
I'm looking at things and saying, well, yes, maybe that's good, but compared to what?
Okay.
Thank you.
And maybe I should just add this, as Steve and I were just chatting offline here. When we first did this schedule, at first we were thinking we need to have at least 24 meetings to be able to do this. And we didn't want to scare you all off in the beginning.
But now that you're brought
you're
in,
here, we didn't think any of you, when Susan was calling, would have signed up. But there is a possibility that either A, we could have more meetings, or Will and I have chatted about the idea of doing these some additional listening tour meetings that may not include the entire task force, but issues could be addressed. But it's clearly, this is your committee. We will do and schedule the meetings as the group sees fit. And I do believe that the things that you're raising, Richard, are point on. This is a heavy load and a lot of work to do in a short amount of time, and I don't want to be in a situation where we're rushed. So we need to be sensitive to that. And if you think that at some point, as we get into the spring, that we need to toss in a couple more meetings to address some of these things, I think that's something that we should consider.
Were there any other questions or comments so far? Yes.
Yeah, so as far as the technology discussion and your mention of interoperability, will you be providing us with some of the, again, basic sort of information about the interoperability issues? Because I've worked on bills in California before where people sort of come in and they say, hey, we're going to, it was like one of these gut and amend things where a bill showed up in early August that wanted to enter California into some sort of toll interoperability system, and you know I ended up having to do quick research and realized that there were huge numbers of privacy issues related with sending data about people into some kind of a hub, and no provisions for that with respect to that hub. Say, safeguarding the personal information of drivers. So it would be really helpful when we talk about things like an interoperability issue to understand, well, what are the terms of service and privacy policies or the data handling policies and security protocols that any of these entities that you might want to be interoperable with are. Because that's always the danger, is the downstream dissemination or disclosure of location data.
Sure. Short answer is yes. The intent is that there will be a significant amount of background information in your briefing books. For the purposes of keeping meetings on schedule, we probably won't go into huge depth re-presenting the information during these meetings so that we can have more discussion. But yes, and from both a technical perspective and also the policy perspective. Anything else?
Karen? You good? Okay. All right. So as we look to the next item, as we've talked about, shows that we're supposed to be at our lunch break, and we are at 3 minutes until 12. So I guess that means we must be doing this thing right. We'll break for lunch. What's the will of the group? We show lunch at 60 minutes. Is that okay with everybody that we reconvene right at 1 p.m.? All right. Without objection, we'll be back here at 1 o'clock. Thank you.